All right, so today, Naomi, what we're going to be doing is just going over your design system and just really working together to build out your next set of components, all right? Yeah. So you're in the file with me, aren't you?
Yeah.
All right, so what we want to do is we want to lay out what we call the foundations of your design system, and then we'll take it from there. So you see how you've got atoms here, which is fine, but one of the key things I could start with is what we call foundations. Yeah. And then what you can do as well, when you want to label these pages, if you wanted to get creative, you can basically add an emoji here, if you wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know how to get the emoji icon working?
No. What's the shortcut?
So it's actually Control. So basically you just double click onto it, and it's Control, Command, and then Spacebar at the same time. Control, Command, and Spacebar. Yeah, it should work for you. You might have to press it. You have to press Control first, then Command, Spacebar. Press it all at once. So press it 1, 2, 3, and it should work. But press and hold.
Okay.
That makes sense?
Yeah.
All right. Oh, I think I found the component. It's this one, I think. Yep, there we go. So there's your foundations, okay? Mm-hmm. Now, inside your foundations, you have all of these things that you've done correctly. So colors, typography, spacing, icons, drop shadow, we call those effects. Then another thing you'll add, avatars is fine. We'll add what we call spacing, radius, and grids, which is another one that you can add into that. And then another thing you can add are things like logos. Yeah. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So that gives you all the basic things you'll need as a product designer to build up your design system. Now, what you've already done is you've already built out. Are you clicking on my face so you can follow me? Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, brilliant.
Just here.
Okay, good. So what you can do is, like, you see, because you've already built these out, this allows you to have all of the kind of key text here. But what we don't have is a primary set of colors that we're going to use. All right.
Yeah.
So what we can do is we can say, all right, cool. What is our primary set of colors? And it just depends on your brand. Yeah. So whatever your brand color is, that could be your primary set. For the sake of today, we're just going to pick a blue. Right. And that will be one of our primary colors. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It could be anything you want. So, like, for example, what we can do is we can just come in. You've already got your colors here, but for the sake of this, we're going to add this and we're going to call it primary. Yeah. And then let's call this primary 500 or something like that. Right. Primary -500. We'll create that style. So then underneath primary, you've got primary 500. Yeah. And remember what I said about HSB?
Yeah.
So inside of here, you change this to HSB, and then now you've got your values. Okay. A quick shortcut is you can quickly say primary, turn on your next one, detach it, because you're going to change this. So you see it's at 100. You might not want that brightness. So you might say, or instead of saturation, I'm going to make this 85. That makes sense? And that will just drop it a little bit for you, right? Or let's put this back at 95, but we're going to drop this to 90, right? And we just keep going and like, I don't like that. Try 50. So it'll get darker, right? So that's brightness at full brightness, right? And if you go down, then it goes really dark. Does that make sense? All right.
Yeah.
All right. So we want our color to stay the same. We want our saturation of the blue to stay the same. But if we adjust the hue, then the hue will adjust the color up top. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So we want it to be the same blue, okay? But the saturation, which is the intensity of the color, we can play around with that. Does that make sense? Right? So you can see at the top where the line is moving across here.
Yeah.
All right. That's your saturation. When you move left to right, you're playing with the saturation. So it's like the intensity of the color and then the more white you add into the color, like lighter, not lighter, sorry, the intensity is what you're messing around with. Does that make sense? Yeah. So where the intensity here inside of this is 95, let's make the next one have an intensity of 85, for example, right? And if you don't see the visual difference enough, then I'll change it to 75. So you start to see a difference, all right? So you can see 245, you want it 245, you want it 65 now, and you want that 100. You might see a difference. If you don't, you can go down a bit more, like 55, right? So you're keeping your colors in the same family, but you see it as it looks more purple.
Yeah.
All right. And that might not actually be what you want. You might want more shades of blue. So what you would do is you'll say, oh, it looks too purple. So this is where you might play with the hue and you say, oh, instead of it being 245, let me make it 260. It goes back to purple, or I can go 240 and I want it to be more blue. Does that make sense? So you're basically playing with the colors to be like, all right, I'm gonna adjust the hue slightly, and I might leave the saturation the same. So sometimes what I like to do is say, okay, cool. The saturation, all right, is my intensity. The hue is the color. So instead of me playing around with the saturation, intensity of the color, the B, which is the brightness of the color, I'll play with the hue to make it lighter or darker based upon the hue, all right? So you're just playing around to see which one you're gonna edit first. So now I'll go back to my primary, detach it. I know I'm now gonna play with hue. So where it's 240, let's make this 230. Does that make sense? Instead of 230, the visual difference is not there enough. I might say, all right, let me make it 225. All right.
Yeah.
I come over here. I make sure my baseline color's in there, detach it. Then instead of it being, I know this one is 225. Now I'm going to make this 200. Because at 225, it's the same as that one. Or maybe 205, because I'm just want to drop it by 10. Does that make sense? So you're just dropping by 10 points on the hue, okay? And then we go again, right? And this is a great way to very quickly, let me look at this one. So this one is 205, 95, 100. This one is 225, 95, 100. Do you see what I'm saying? So 205, boom. This one is 225. This one is 245, right? Which is our base. All right, does that make sense? Or 241, yeah? Let's make it 245 just to make the maths work, the maths, yeah?
Yeah.
So because this is 205, if we were to drop it by, what's it, this is 240, this is 225, 25. So what is this one now? This is 205, let's make it 195, 95, 100, yeah? So HSB, so we're gonna go, is it making sense so far?
Yeah, that makes sense.
195, we'll make this 95, we'll make this 100. Bang, yeah? So do you see how it still looks like it's in the same family?
Yeah.
Right? And then we go again. We know that this one is at 195. So we know our next one can be at 175. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then but if you go there, you realize, oh, even though I'm only playing with this hue, it's gone too far. Because if you look, that blue is super shocking.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, the
difference is not really, it's really intense, yeah? So you might say, oh, there's far enough. Let me stop. There's far enough, let me stop. So I'm going to take this color, and instead of me playing with the hue, I might just play with the brightness. Because I just want a lighter shade of the set color, because I might use it. It depends on how you're going to use the colors versus you saying, I'm sorry, I played with the opacity here, sorry. So you might just play with the brightness or something, right? To get what you want. Or you play with your intensity, saturation, yeah, to get it to where you want, okay?
Yeah.
So I know I've got the lightest shade in the same palette, right the way up, right? It just depends on how you want it to look, because visually you want the same theme, but you want a range of colors in your primary. but you're going to say, oh, of these, we're going to use either 900, right? Or 700 as my primary. Now, because you've got 900 here, all you literally do, come in here, press that edit button, 900. Does that make sense? Yeah. Boom, you've got this here. Add this one, primary. I know you know how to do this now. Boom. We're just quickly adding these into your design system. And then we'll go and build your button afterwards, all right?
Yeah.
Okay. Don't worry about like the numbers per se. They just help you differentiate colors along a scale.
Yeah.
Yeah? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Primary dash, what is this, 50? Yeah. All right, makes sense? So you're just using the numbers to help you have a scale. And then basically when you click outside of this on your artboard, now you can start to see all your colors in their categories. And did I show you that you can move your categories up and down?
Yeah.
Yeah?
I think it was
Excellent. So then you've got a kind of order, you want to have it in an order that makes sense for you. So you might say primary, then I want to warn someone, then I might have an error, then I have success, neutral, and then your key shades. Sometimes I keep shades at the top because I'm normally using black and white quite a lot. And then primary, because you are using primary quite a lot. So you order it in the way that you think you're going to use the colors the most.
Yeah.
So now when you go back to colors, if you look inside of here now, and you open up this very quickly, all of your basics are there. And you might come in here and you say, oh, that's order's not right. So let me just get the order correct. Make sense?
Yeah.
Why is it not? Yeah, there you go. Yeah? Excellent. So all the basics are there. So now what we're going to do, let's build out your buttons. So for some reason, I don't know why it's not there. I don't know why that didn't work. Yeah? That was really weird. That was weird. That was weird. I don't know what happened there. Okay.
Oh, was it there before?
Yeah, for some reason it wasn't there before. Yeah, it just wasn't there before. Okay, cool. So I mean, what I mean is a page wasn't there for buttons before.
Oh.
So we're going to create a new page. We're going to call it, buttons. Yeah. All right. Now, the number one thing you want to do when you're building out your buttons, right, is here you go. You just have your buttons. But because your buttons are built on text, right, and inside your design system, there's no library to pull from.
Yeah.
The best thing to do is actually get your typography library built out first. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And the way you build out a type scale is you normally base it on basically because your pixel grid is built on an 8-point pixel grid, which is like a given standard. You kind of want them to be roughly multiples of 2 or multiples of 8, right? It's kind of basic values. You might like have, so you might have your headings, right, for example, and then you have all of these headings that will be a variation of that multiple, right? So you always start with 8 at a base. So we'd call this text, for example, and then we'll have 8. Then 8 times 2 is what?
16.
Yeah. So 16. And then 16 and plus 8 is what?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Don't worry, 24.
Yeah. 24.
Yeah. And then after that, we'd have 32.
2. Yeah.
Yeah. And then we have what? 48, I think. No, sorry, 42. No, we'd have 40. Yeah. Yeah. 48. And you seen what's happening? It gives you a scale. And as you do this, you're starting to get an idea of like, okay, cool. This is now a scale that's starting to make sense. Is it clear to you so far?
Yeah.
Yeah, you got
For
56.
for mobile, so mobile you use a 8-point grid basically.
That's correct. But like you see, text at this size is so small that normally you don't really use it. So what sometimes people do is they say, okay, 8 is too small because it's not even legible. So sometimes what people do is they say, okay, let's put 12 in between, because in between 16 and in between 8, 12 is actually legible.
Yeah.
So then 12 becomes an option even though it's not a multiple of 8. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's also still about legibility, and that's kind of how it can work to help you as well. There are tools you can use to help you create text values. So I'm saying like create text and use. I'll try and find it. It's like a specific website that helps you basically work out your text sizes. Make it responsive. But it just depends, because there's multiple ways that you can do this. But you know, the goal is to make it responsive and to work on different screen sizes. So then you have different ways of measuring text, which is like for your this is all done in pixels. So if I come here, you can see it's all in pixels. I may not like this font style, Kimby, whatever. So let's put it all in Helvetica, just so it's a bit more legible. And then we've got our different text styles there. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And let's get start. Luckily, you know, here's one I've made earlier. All right. So I'll copy over my one just to help you save time. But I'm gonna still want you to build in one as well, okay? Yeah, here we go. I'm just gonna take this. Why is it not working? Okay, I pulled out the wrong one. Okay. Typography. Is this the one I have? Oh yeah, here we go. Here's a visual type style. This is the link that I was looking for. Right?
Okay.
Right? Because on this link, what happens is, right, it gives you a baseline, gives you the scale and the font, and then it gives you like the visuals so you can understand how it works, right? But the way it works, it uses this thing called the golden ratio, which is just a standard mathematical principle. And then what happens is that at each baseline, you have line height, you have the pixel size, the line height, and then this will allow you to then create a kind of average of where, so if I do 24 pixels times 120, it looks mad like this, but in percentages it would be like 0.010. Then you say 2.88, you round that off, you get about 28 pixels. We don't need to get this granular, but it's just helping you understand how you'd find the right baseline. So you have a baseline font, okay? That baseline font would have some kind of line height that could be generic to all text sizes. But all your text sizes generally become a multiple of 8, okay? So if I divide it by 8, or it's either a multiple of 8 or a multiple of 2. Depends on the grid that you're working with. I like to work with an 8-point grid. This is not an 8-point grid. If I was to use 72 divided by 8, for example, then it would be more accurate because this says 74. But an 8-point grid would give you this kind of scale here. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me see if I can type in a visual type scale, see if the website's working. Ah, okay. Type scale's back. This is a new one. But you have your base font. You see your base font here, 16 pixels. And then what it will do, it will give you the size in REMs, which is more of a, it's more for websites.
Yeah.
But if you click on pixels, then you can see where it gets to in pixels times by your scale. But so you'd have to pick the scale you want. Normally the major scale is the kind of most common. no designer ever really does this, by the way. But it's just to help you understand. Once you have a base, like this is your paragraph, your text font, then after that you'll have your headings. Normally you have 6 headings as a given that you'll have for desktops. And then you might have small, which would be like legal text, or small, like, you know, underneath a form, you say like terms and conditions, click on this button for terms and conditions. That's kind of small. Then you might have legal text in your footer. So copyrighted 2024, name of company, does that, all rights reserved. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And that's your 10, 11 size fonts, right? So this will give you, this scale will give you everything that you need. Here's an example of it in a landing page. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So you can kind of see how it plays out. All right. But this gives you everything you need for your website, right? And in pixels. So you can see 16 pixels, 20 pixels, 25. We normally round to 24, 31.25. We make it 32, 39. We make 40. It's never used like this. It's always rounded numbers. Does that make sense? But always make it a multiple of 8 because your grid is built on an 8 pixel grid. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions?
No questions.
Yeah. I just kind of want to help you understand that and a base, and as a base, that it helps you make sense. What I'm going to do is copy over a type style for you that you can work with. And then this gives you a base to build off from. And you might say, okay, this is subtitles, right? This is body copy. I may not need all this body copy, so all that can get rid of, for example. But then at this is 18. This is body copy 2 at 16. And then you can say, all right, my first body copy, if I make that 16, like this one, for example, I can come in here and you can define how you label it because it's still part of your design system. So we say this is body copy. Yeah. And then instead of body copy 2, I might say something like body main. Yeah. But this is my main. Or sometimes be more explicit, 16 pixels. Does that make sense? Yeah. Then I might come here, boom, add to my design system, body, and I might say body, and I'm going to make this one 18 pixels. Yeah. So now when I want to pick for my body copy, I have 2 options. But then remember, line height, you can make it 120%. And then you can always play with your line height because you can see here's 24, but you can start to see what happens when you play with line height. Does that make sense? Yeah. So let me type in 120 pixels because it's a great, sometimes people start from 100%.
Yeah.
But my problem with 100%, it can feel quite tight.
Yeah, that does look quite tight.
Yeah. So a great place to start from is just, I always start from 120%. Yeah. And then I play with it from there. So I'll say 140. That looks a bit better maybe. So I'll say, all right, let me leave it 120% for now. And then if I want to, I just come back to my design system. And then what I'll do for my design system is then I will make this at design system level. I'll change the line height here. Okay. Over here, you have your letter spacing. So that is your spacing between the letters themselves. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right. I normally leave this at 0 for fonts like Helvetica, Arial, Inter, like the big main fonts. If that's not the case, then what you could do is say, all right, cool, that's good to go. And then leave it here. Now, when I'm building out a design system, let me just detach this quickly. I like to use fonts like Inter because it's a Google font.
Yeah.
So I always start with Google fonts, and then when you know what fonts you're using for specific projects, you want to install those fonts first. And then after you've installed those fonts, you then will use that font to create first. So you'd have to click on it, then you'd have to change your font, then you add it to your library. Does that make sense?
So use like in terms like the base in your design system first, and then
you could take it from there. So like I can come in here, change it to Helvetica, then I can add this to my design system, but I have to change the font first, then I add to design system, but it will keep the Helvetica as the main font I'm using, right? But because I've told it I'm using Inter, okay, that will be seen as my main font. So you see I've got Inter instead of like, so now in your design system, you can make that 16 pixels. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah.
This one now, I'm going to make this 18 pixels. And what's good is because I've actually built this as a component, as a textile, 18, boom, boom, 16. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I'm actually starting to use that. And now on here now, that will also have those same values because I've made them from this text that I've created. So when you're building this whole thing out, you can start from here and that gives you all the basic things you need. But the reason why I'm not going to do everything, because I'll let you do the rest, because it's already mapped out for you, right?
Yeah.
But remember, multiples of 8 has to be a multiple of 8. Okay. So if it's not a multiple of 8, just make it a multiple of 8. Like 60 is not a multiple of 8. So what we would do is we'd say, let's make this 64. And then now if I take 64 divided by 8, that says 8, yeah? So that's more accurate for what you'd need. But you might make it a multiple of 8, but from a scale wise, the scale is too close. Because that's 72, that's 64. So if it's H1, H2, right? So I know it says heading Excel and all that. What I would do, I would change these. So like say heading 1. This is like a very common way that headings are labeled inside of websites. Because this is the way that Google reads pages. That makes sense?
Gotcha. Yeah.
Heading 3. Heading 4. Heading 5. Yeah? And you can do 6 if you need to. I'll give you an example of why this is so. Let's say we go to a standard website. So let's look at like what's a good, let's look at HubSpot. That comes to mind, yeah? So if I go to HubSpot, just a normal CRM website, the way Google reads the page is that it has all of these headings, right? So you can see here it says H2, H3, all the way down. And then you've got H1, which is grow better with HubSpot. Now, normally on websites that are built correctly, there should only be one H1 on the page. Because the H1 is the main heading that you want Google to read to tell Google what this page is all about. And even when we're building applications, we follow the same principle. So you can see here H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, H6, because normally you don't need more than 6 headings. So when we go back to our design system, you realize we've got 5. I just come here, duplicate it, and create a heading 6. Does that make sense? But my heading 6, because my body copy is my subtitles, my largest subtitle might be at 20. I might start my H6 at maybe 20, but keep it bold. And then take it from there. Does that make sense? Yeah, but remember multiples of 8, right? Ideally, okay? But H6 is an outlier. It's like very rare you'd need an H6 on a web page, but if you ever do, then you have it there as an option. All right. Any questions?
The spacing between the line spacing, would that have to be that would have to be consistent across?
Yeah. So what I would do is always like have a look. Does 120% work for you? If it does or doesn't, then you can adjust from there. There are formulas that you can use to create like a line height that makes sense. Personally, I just personally say, all right, cool. 120% is where I'm going to start. And ideally with the same line height, visually, when you build out your page, everything will start to look and feel very consistent. So I always start at 120% when I'm using fonts from Google, because they tend to look okay. And if it doesn't, then you can just adjust it by 10% up or down. Yeah?
Yeah.
That makes sense?
Yeah.
Brilliant. But because we're just building buttons today, that's why I wanted to first build out just the body text, because for buttons, you always start always, well, not always, but I always tend to start at 16 because it's the pixel size that is the most legible across the most devices. 16 pixels. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So when you're working on buttons, buttons follow that same principle. It's the number one component that's read the most across most pages. Every page will have a button, right? Because there will always be an action to take. So therefore you start with the font size that's the most legible across this number one component. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right, excellent. So when you're building out your buttons, one of the key things you want to start with is you want to put your button inside a frame, right? So Shift and A, that puts it inside a frame, okay? Yeah. Now, the reason why you're putting it inside a frame and not a group is because you want your button to be easier for you to manage, okay? So here is a frame. We're going to call this button primary, okay? And then that's your main button. Does that make sense? Yeah. All right. Now, because we've already, if you look at the order, if you notice, it's got from the top, you've got the position of component on the canvas. You've got your width and your height. You've got whether your button has a fixed width, meaning that it's fixed at the width that you see above here, or does it hug based upon the content that sits inside the button. Does that make sense? Yeah. So let me extend it. So there's your fixed width, right? Fixed, or hug. It hugs based upon the component and the horizontal and vertical padding that you've added to this component. Does that make sense?
Gotcha. Yeah.
All right. So one of the key things you want to do, remember we're working with a multiple of 8, right?
Yeah.
So inside of it, you can say here, this is what we call the horizontal gap between items. So if you had multiple items, you changed it to have a vertical layout. You had these multiple items. This says 10. We want to make this 8. Does that make sense?
Right.
But because we only have one button, we just get rid of all of this stuff. Does that make sense? Yeah. Right? I'm just showing you visually so you understand why we're doing what we're doing, right? Yeah. So we're just trying to follow the order to make sense. Now, if we also want to round off the corners of our buttons, we also start with 8. Does that make sense? Now, you can make it less or more because like less or more rounded buttons it's about the effect that you want, okay? Yeah. But you're not going to see the roundedness of the button. The reason why is because we haven't added in the color yet. Does that make sense? Yeah. But because we know what our primary color is, 900, we know, here we go. Here is our button with its primary color. If I go back to 0, you can see what I'm editing there. Make that an 8. Also, we have our horizontal and vertical padding, but you see how it says 10 here? Yeah. Right? Now, this is bad for us. The reason why is because it's not a multiple of 8. Make sense?
Right, yeah.
Okay. Now, we don't need it on the horizontal yet. So you can actually zero this out, right? But if you don't add the vertical padding, do you see what happens to your button?
Yeah.
It becomes really squashed, okay? Because it's hugging to the height of the textile inside. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So because we want to make it match what we said, we can make it an 8. So that's your kind of like bigger button. Yeah. Or you can just leave it there. Any questions before we continue?
No, that makes sense.
Yeah. Now, inside your buttons, another thing you're going to need to do is you're going to need to add icons inside of your button. So one of the key things you want to do is that before you start working on your button, you might have a set of icons that you're going to bring in. Luckily, I've already got loads here for you to see. For the sake of this demonstration, I'm just going to show you arrows. I'll copy that over for you. I've got all these multiple different arrows, and I'm just going to create a component set, and I'm going to call these icons. Yeah, but dash arrows. So I could do dash arrows, or I could do icons / arrows. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right. It's saying inside it some things are conflicting. That could be because I've not set properties properly, but we ain't got the time to do that right now. So for the sake of this presentation, I'm just going to go assets, local components, icons, click on it, it says arrows, and it's pulled out one component, but it says there's 98 variants. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I can take this and put this here.
Where can you get icons from? Is there a...
Oh, there's loads of places. There's one called icon sets. So I normally go community, search icons. And then inside of here, you'll find a lot of libraries. Excellent. I'll go back to the button. So when you're building out your button, you basically want to, you notice that the layout of the button is vertical. That doesn't work for buttons. So you want it horizontal, yeah? The only other issue that you're seeing is that the button, when I right click, plugins, and I go to contrast, it's gonna fail. And the reason why it fails is because the contrast is not strong enough, right? And if you notice that this is a value, but if I go into dev mode quickly, that color is just sitting, it's not part of my quote unquote design system because it's not labeled correctly, you see?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So what I would do is I would come in, I know the contrast is wrong, so I'm going to change that black text to a lighter shade, come back into my button, right click. Have you installed this plugin called contrast?
Yeah, I've got that plugin.
Click on it for contrast, and now because the contrast is stronger, I pass accessibility. You with me?
Yeah.
It also means that on my icons, I want my icons to pass accessibility as well. And then if I want to make changes to my icons, I've got all variants of that in place, right?
Yeah.
But for some reason, we'd have to go back to the icon to make sure it also inherits the white text because it's inheriting it from the original. Okay, so we need that to be able to shift as well. Okay, so you always want a text on the icon on the right and an icon on the left.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Let me see if I can do. Oh, it's not going to do left. Left arrow. Change that to white. Now you've got your kind of core button here. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So you've put your corner radius.
Yep.
You've made your horizontal layout. You've made sure that the gaps in between have the same 8 pixels. You see where it's highlighting the gaps, yeah?
Yep.
You've made sure that your horizontal padding on the right and the left is 16 pixels, okay? So if I click on it, you'll see it says 16 here. Double click 16 here, all right? If I felt it was too big, I can even make that 8 to make it a bit tighter if I wanted to.
Yeah.
Right? You can also see the vertical padding is 8 pixels as well.
Mm-hmm.
And if I click back on the button, it's a primary version of the button. And if I go into dev mode, you can see the border padding is consistent, the corner radiuses are consistent, the padding is consistent. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Right? And that's basically what you want when you're starting to build out your components. You want that consistency for the engineers to see, oh, corner radius, padding. Okay, that's good. When I scroll down, I can see that the display sits in line and it's a flex box. So the components are flexing vertically or horizontally. The padding is center aligned and all the items within, in other words, this text here is center aligned. Mm-hmm. Okay. And also everything inside of the primary button is center aligned. The gap between the elements is 8 pixels. Border radius 8 pixels. Background is the primary variant for my primary brand color. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that gives you all of the core foundational basics that you'll need when it comes on to building out your design system.
Gotcha.
Before we go forward, do you have any questions?
No, that makes sense. All
right. Now, when you're building out your design system though, you're actually going to need to create variations of your button. Okay. Mm-hmm. And it normally starts with sizes. And then from those sizes, we'll start moving into other things from there. Okay. So I'll break it down for you so you can see. So let's just, because it's our main button, you can do large, but because we're going to try and do sizes, we'll adjust it by size. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So what we'll do is we'll say This is a large button. Okay. And then after this, you'll have like extra large. Make sense?
Yeah.
So normally what you do with your buttons at like extra large sizes is you might adjust your padding, and you can also adjust your font size if you want as well. So I'll give you an example of that. So you can see, 1 second, font size 16. All right. So you might, same font size, but because it's extra large, what you might do is you'll say, okay, horizontal padding instead of it. So it depends on what you need. So you might say, let me make this 12, for example.
Okay.
And then you might say, I need an even bigger button. Normally you don't really need a button like this, but it just really depends on what you're doing, right? Okay, and then let's say that button, what you might do is then now I'm adjusting the font size to be even bigger, and I'm adjusting the padding to be even bigger. So I might say 24 and I might say 16. Does that make sense?
Oh, okay.
It's very subtle, but you're starting to see what can happen when you go bigger. But we're starting in the middle. Do you notice?
Yeah.
Then on this side, we're going to say medium. Yeah. Oh, whoops. And then we're going to say small, because you always need a small button. And then medium button, small button. Your medium button, for example, you'll say, okay, where here you went 8, 8, 8. This is now where you can play around with it a little bit more. You might say, okay, cool. On the height, I might do 6, because you can't. There's no multiples of 8 after this, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah.
Does that make sense? Yeah. There's no multiples of 8 now, and then this is where you might leave this at 8, but you might change horizontal padding to like something like 4, right? Because you just want it to be super tight now. Okay.
Yeah. That makes sense.
So it's just how much smaller do you want to go, how much larger, and then your goal is to try and give you that variety within your buttons. All right. So let me see if I can give you some other examples. So sometimes you could do. Let me see if I can make it work. 8. This is sometimes what some people do. Then after 8, 12, you might say 10, 14. So this might give you. So then you can go from a small. You start with your multiple of 8, and then you might say 12. So you're visually playing with it to see what works based upon what you're trying to achieve. And if you've got all the basics there, you kind of have your range. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right. Let me see if I can just do this here. Now, I'm just gonna delete these quickly because we still haven't finished on our primary button. Okay. You always kind of start with this middle one first.
Yeah.
And then on the horizontals, let's just keep it 16 just for the sake, just for what we're trying to do, just give us more of a range. Okay. Now, when you're building out your component now, you need to basically be able to change and adjust. So once you've built out these basics, you see here it says icon, button text, and then icon. Do you see that?
Yeah.
All right. What you want to do now is you want to say, all right, cool. Let me now make this a component. So this is my primary button. Okay. And what you want to do is you want to say, okay, cool. Here's my primary button. Oh, yeah. Sorry, I did it the wrong way. Let me actually go back, put all those buttons back. Okay. I'm gonna take all of these buttons and I'm gonna label the buttons. Okay.
Okay.
So this, we're going to label this primary to, let's say 2XL, for example. This is XL. This one is large. This one is it making sense so far?
Yeah, that makes sense.
What was this going on? Medium. This one is small. Okay, so those are all your buttons. Okay, so because I've actually done this, I can take all of these buttons and now I click on this, I'm making component set. Okay, so what that allows me to do, it allows me to pull out one button, and all I need to do is on the primary, change this property to say size. And on my button, I can say, oh, I want a small, medium, a large button. Do you see how my button is just adjusting?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Now there's key things you want to make sure you adjust on these buttons as well. So I'll give you an example. I may want to, because I want to make sure the height stays the same, I'll change that to a fixed height. So no matter how I change the button height will always fix at the height that I've set here. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And then it's hugging so that from left to right, it will always hug based upon if I've got one icon or two icons. For example, if I come in here and I delete that icon, it will hug, you see, to what's inside of it. So now when I come back to my main button, you see how it's changed to say fix now.
Yeah.
Right. Let me just put this in a frame quickly, just so you can see. This is like our playground, yeah, where we're going to play around with our button just to make sure it's working. All right. And then let's go back here. Let's go over here, and we want it to say small, medium, large. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, from an order standpoint. Now I click on here, small, medium, large, extra large, double XL. Make sense?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. How many cool things you can do.
Yeah, it's cool, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right? And this is the key thing I want you to understand. But now buttons have states, okay? So this would be what we call our default state, okay? Then we'd have like some kind of hover. So you know, like when you hover over a button?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And then you'd have some kind of, sometimes a focus state, like if a button is active. Okay. Okay. So now what we're trying to do is we'll say, okay, cool, let's extend this. You just take the exact same buttons and you literally just copy and paste it down. Does that make sense? But because they're similar buttons, what we're going to do, primary now becomes 700 because we're just hovering over the button. Do you see? So we just, that's why we have that variety in color. Okay. But then the difference is, in regards to the whole component, we only have one variant, which is size. Now what we'll do is we'll create another variant and we'll call this variant state. Okay. And then by default, everything will be default, but I'm going to hover over these ones and just change the because so basically, because I haven't changed the default, there's going to be a conflict. And I'll only see the conflict when I click on my playground because everything says default. So let me put it here. Everything's default. There's a conflict because these are different buttons. So I highlight these buttons, change the state, make it say hover. Now, when I go over here, okay, I can be hover button, default button. Does that make sense?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. The only other issue I have is that, let me go back. I haven't actually built this out properly. So in the large section, in the button section, what I'll do is, you see all these, we need to make these editable as well. So what I'll show you what that means. if I go back to over here, and it says reset to default. Let's just do that for now. We'll put this on large. Keep it all default, right? If I want to change the text on the button, I literally have to click inside the button and then change the text. All right?
Yeah.
This is not a good practice because what happens inside of Figma is that it gives you the ability to just change the text field and be able to be more flexible with your buttons. So what that means is, let's say I have a large button. I click on text. If you look on the right hand side, I have the ability to take that text and just say change text. Buttons, create that property. Now, when I click on button, over here, you see where it says change text? I literally click in here and I'll say boom, and it just changes the text for me.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So that's a much better way for you to change your buttons, because you might make a mistake by double clicking in here, doing something wrong, detaching it, all that stuff. So it gives you the flexibility to be able to do that. Another thing it gives you flexibility on is on your icons. So what you would do is, you see where it says over here, right? It gives you the ability to swap. It's called an instant swap. Swap the instance. So here I'll say right icon. Yeah. And over here, I'll say create the property left icon. Okay. So why do I do that? I do that so that when I go to my playground now, on said button, when I want to change the right icon, I click on here. And then remember, you've already got your icons, right? And then boom, you make a change, right? Oh, I know why. It's just conflicting. There's a conflict on the button, on the icons. So it's not going to pick up all the variants of the icon.
Yeah, that makes sense.
All right. But that's how you would do it. So the best way you do it is, let me go back to here. You see how over here you've got the different variations of it, and you can reorder it so that it makes sense for you. If you want, you might icon text. Yeah. So now on the button, you have the ability to make those changes. If you ever have a conflict, just put back the colors that you need. Okay. Sometimes what I've seen other designers do that can be helpful is when you click on the actual component layer, where it says right icon, I've seen people be able to like come in here, turn on the emoji tool, and then they'll say, okay, this icon is for the right one. Does that make sense?
Okay.
And then this icon is for the left one. I hope that makes sense, what I'm saying.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. It's just little visual cues to help you indicate over here now which is the exact one that you're editing.
Yeah.
You see, when you hover over it, you get a little highlight state. Let me make it bigger so you can see. You see when I'm hovering over it, it highlights which one you're going to now edit. Okay. Depending upon what you need. Sometimes you might have like inside of layers, you might have like different icons that's just ready for you to use. So if I go back to icons, and I've got icons interfaces, if I just detach these, let me see if I can pull these out. Yeah, I just want to highlight these icons for now. I'm just going to pull it out of here. Yep. It should go back to buttons. Ah, here we go. Arrows, yeah? If I come back out, icons, user interface, icons, user interface, and you've got everything here.
Oh, perfect.
I would never go so deep. The only reason why it's so deep is because I've put the inside of buttons. Let me show you again. Icons. It's got the user interface section.
Yep.
Then it says icons, user interface, two-tone, search. I would never go so deep. Like, I literally would delete all of this and literally just call it search. That makes sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's just easy to find.
It's just easy to find. Yeah. So if I go back to our button, I look inside of here, go back to where it says user interface. Now search is there at the top level. Do you see that? Okay. I hope this is helpful. Just kind of going deep like this to show you how things work. Yeah. So, all right, let me show you the other variant. So now you see, I've already done that on the master button. Okay. Now, another thing you can do, I can turn this on and off. So I could say, all right, this icon, I don't want this icon to be on. So it's called a layer swap or layer Boolean property. So you click on this and then here I'll say right icon. Yeah. And you see it says true or false. That just means on and off. Yeah. Create that property. Then over here, I'll go layer swap, create property, and I'll say left icon. Now the reason why I'm doing this, and I'll show you why, is that if I go to my playground now, I get the ability to turn these on and off.
Okay.
Because I might just want a button with text, or I might just want a button, but it doesn't have a left, it has a right. Does that make sense? All right. But you see, when you start to make things hug, you realize that, oh, when I start to turn things off, maybe the left and right is a bit too close visually. Because, you know, in regards to the icon, sometimes the icon has its own spacing inside and then it has its own padding around it. So sometimes, even though you see that on the button itself, you might override and say, okay, cool. On the left-hand padding, I'm going to make that 16 just visually so that it makes sense. Sorry. So that visually it matches on the left and right sides. You can basically do that if you want to as well. Okay. But that's a great way for you to like visually see the difference. Or sometimes what you might do is you might go to the actual component here. And then sometimes what people do is they'll literally get rid of they'll get rid of the spacing around it. Like just resize. Yeah, just resize it at this level. And that's a better way of doing it. It's just longer. So it's just getting the right icon pack is part of the art of it as well. If you're gonna be this granular in building out your button properties, then I just want to kind of show you what Figma can do. I'll also sometimes on my main button here layer swap the text. So I'll say text on and off. Go back to my playground. All right. And then I might say, oh, take off the text, take off one of the icons, and I just have an icon button now. Come back here, turn the icon and text on, it's back to being a button. Okay? So now if you look on the right hand side, you can change your state. Not yet though, so let's do that. So actually, well, we need to turn it on for all the buttons. Okay, so we go inside of here, we click on this, we go all layer swap, text, button, text change text. Yeah. Click on that, and then we'll say right icon, layer on the right icon. Yeah. A great way to speed this up is actually, because we've copied the same button, Figma has this ability that if you've copied the same component, it will select all instances with the same layer name. So you just click on that, and then because I've selected, if you look here, I've selected all of the right icons, do you see? Because remember, I've just duplicated the same button initially. I go boom, right, boom, right. So once you do it for one, you can do it for all. So I click on the text now. Remember, it's going to tell me select all 5 matching layers. Boom. It selected it across all the buttons, you see? So layer swap the text and then text change on that, okay? The last one I have to do is the left icon. Select all instances. Making sense so far?
Yeah.
Change that on the left icon. Change this one on the left icon as well. So now, no matter what icon, even though even though I've got this one main button, even if I change the size to 2XL, I've still got the same options. Do you see?
Right. Okay.
All right. Even though I did it on one button, the reason why we start with one, we get everything right with one, then we make all our variants. Once we make all our variants, then now I can say, now I've done that work, I take this, copy it. Now I can say on hover, let's change this. You see how it's conflicting now? Because I've copied the same thing. So it's conflicting. As if I change the state to hover, press enter, the conflict goes.
Right.
But visually, I need to change it, or 500 even, too much. So we say 7, so it's subtle. And then you've got a hover change on these buttons here. Sorry. Does that make sense? All right. Might bring it a little bit closer. So visually, can we see the difference? Just a slight difference. So that will show you where you can play around with your colors a bit more. So I might say, okay, cool. Let me go back to colors. Go back to this secondary blue. And I might say, okay, cool. Where I had it at HSB 225, let's make this 220. Okay.
Yeah.
Because it's not that much different. But when I go back to buttons at a hover state level, visually, it feels like there's a bit more of a difference now. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
If I check the contrast, it should still pass. Okay. So even though it fails here, don't worry, that's a much higher contrast. For at normal level, it's still legible, even if I hover. Does that make sense? Okay. And that can be done there. And then a focus state normally will have some kind of like, focus is normally like got some kind of stroke or something around it. So I might hover this. Let me just check this quickly. If I go to stroke, I might make it 50. It's on the outside, and we can make that, let's say 2 pixels or something like that. Okay. It's just a button that's been focused on. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. But the brand color inside the button would still be a primary. In other words, it will still be a primary color, but in a focus state. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So now I take all these, I go to state. It's conflicting now. FOCUSED. Bang. Make sense?
Yeah.
And then the last state you have is what we call disabled. Disabled, yeah? So, you understand disabled, right?
Yep.
So we might say, because you've already created the grays, copy that down. I always change the color first, get your color right. So we've got your neutrals. So we might say a 300 or something, or 200. Your text, where it's shade of white, we can use another shade of gray. So we can make it like a 5 if we want. Or you can even keep, because it's disabled, you can leave it closer. So like 400. So the text behind is what? 300. Let's make that 200. Yeah. So it really looks disabled. Let's get rid of the focus state. Okay. And then now all of these up here where it says state, it's conflicting. Change the text DISABLED. Bang. Okay. And automatically you now have your core set of buttons. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So what we do now is we come over here, we look at this button, and then we say, oh, what size do I want? I want it large. What state is it? Hover, right? Let's build out all of the buttons, yeah? All right, so now, yeah, you've got this one, large, you say default. This one is on hover. This one is focused. This one is disabled. But if you look carefully, it's all just one button. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all one button. So no matter where you're using it throughout your product now, that one button now becomes, sorry, button becomes your source of truth for everything you need. So you don't even have to create multiple buttons. Do you see what I'm saying? You have one button, and it's the one button you're using throughout the product. Now, let's say you need to change your primary color. Now you know what to do. You come here to primary, you scroll down, and you see everywhere that primary color is being used, you click on that and you just change the color. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And now everywhere that is using that color, so let's say, for example, the brand has gone through a big rebrand project. I come in here, I change this to purple. Now everywhere that brand color will inherit that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's basically how you build your buttons. All right. So the reason why I show you this, because even though it's a very core component, it's a very essential component, right? In the sense that it's a type of component where you're using it everywhere, but once you do it once, you've foundationally built it out to be used everywhere else. Okay.
Yeah.
Any questions?
No questions for me.
Yeah, you sure?
Yeah, that makes sense.
All right, brilliant. I wanted you to see that, because that will really help you to be able to, like, just be able to have that ability to have those variants super quick. All right. Let me stop here.